Hey, what's up guys? Gons here for the Facelikethesun YouTube channel. As promised, this is the conversation with Anthony Patch. And during the conversation, we got into CERN, we got into the Large Hadron Collider, and some of the esoteric connections with Saturn and other dimensions, and also his theories about what happened to the Airbus 320 that crashed just a couple days ago. And I want to thank everybody who asked questions in the comment section in the video yesterday. They were superb questions, and I was able to grab a handful of them, and I definitely mention your YouTube handle just to make sure I'm giving credit where credit is due. So, without further ado, here's Anthony Patch. With me here today is Anthony Patch. He is the author of Covert Catastrophe and 2048 Diamond in the Rough, and also the science companion to that book. He runs anthonypatch.com. He's a researcher and obviously an author, and we're thrilled to have him here. Anthony, how you doing?
Very good. Thank you, Gons. I appreciate you having me on.
No problem. We appreciate you spending the time and taking the time to discuss some of the matters that we're seeing here with CERN and everything else. And I gathered some questions from some of the viewers of the Facelikethesun YouTube channel. So I wanted to start off with a question that Amy Thompson had, and she wanted to know why she had never heard of something like CERN before in the mainstream media, if it was potentially such a destructive thing.
Well, I think the fact that we have a mainstream media that essentially is state-controlled is indicative of her not hearing about it. It is kind of an esoteric in the sense of physics and the science world itself, and typically is beyond the normal radar, if you will, of people who are outside the sphere or outside the world of physics. And I say it's esoteric in the sense that it is very arcane type of physics. It's very specific and quite complicated in some respects. But I think it is also a deliberate action on the part of state-controlled, state-run media to not bring a lot of attention to the activities in Switzerland at CERN. And part of what we see with the military actions around the world also play a role in that distraction. So I'm not surprised that she's not heard about it. A great many people that I encounter have never heard of CERN. And that's part of your mission and my mission, is to bring that awareness to people.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And, you know, just for people that may be watching this or seeing something about CERN for the first time on this video, in your own words, what is CERN and what exactly is this Large Hadron Collider, and what's their goal? What are they trying to do?
Well, it's the largest machine in recorded history that's ever been built by man that we're aware of. May have been something predating in the ancient times, but in modern times, the largest, most powerful machine, and certainly the most expensive that's ever been built by man. It is essentially a particle accelerator. It is accelerating small particles of material, say protons, subatomic particles at near the speed of light using electricity, radio frequency pulses, and magnets to control the particle streams. And the purpose of accelerating these particles to near the speed of light is so that they can collide when they meet each other after rotating about a large ring in opposite directions. The collisions cause the breaking away of smaller components of subatomic particles. Their stated goal is to try to determine the origins of the universe by going to the very smallest subatomic quantum level particles and discovering what was announced as the God particle in one instance. The Large Hadron Collider discovered the Higgs boson, is the public story. And so they're trying to, in some sense, recreate the moment of the Big Bang, if you believe in that theory, by looking at the particles that existed at the time of the Big Bang for the start of the universe, the expansion of it. Their purpose is not only to determine the origins, what matter, what particles and what energy existed at the time of the Big Bang, But also, just recently, and this sounds very science fiction, but this comes right from the scientists, the spokespersons at CERN, that they expect to find other dimensions, that they expect to open gateways or portals, if you will, into other dimensions. And I'll stop there so you can interject, but I can give you the bigger purpose in a moment.
Sure, yeah. And actually, that was the question that Zeus the Zeta asked. And his question was, how does a machine that's just supposed to look for subatomic particles going to open a portal?
Yeah, very good. Theoretically, there is something called the Higgs field, and that's associated with the Higgs boson. Scientists say that, and I don't necessarily adhere to this, but they say that the majority of the universe is made up of dark matter and dark energy, and what holds that together is what is described as the Higgs field, a matrix, if you will. And what they need to do is create enough energy, tera-electron volts, that will allow them to pierce the veil, to physically separate the fabric of space or the Higgs field itself. The Higgs field is theoretically comprised of what are known as WIMPs. These are small particles that are loosely bound together that comprise this physical matrix. And in order to separate these particles, they need sufficient quantities of energy. And at this point, it looks like 14 tera-electron volts or trillion electron volts are going to be generated in September at the Large Hadron Collider. Thus, when they generate these energies, they're able to direct them at a very small microscopic point. And that will essentially open this field by separating the matrix of the Higgs field. And that's a simple explanation. And again, that's all theoretical.
Right. That's really interesting. Now, we'll get back into some of the, the portal opening kind of stuff in a moment, but there was a good question that was asked by Kathleen, and she asked, how does this research not generate a significant electromagnetic force with potential to do harm to adjacent populations or people that work, within the facilities? Because, she said that she works with MRI and understands the sort of the basic principles at a smaller scale, but she was wondering, how the workers and the people in the near vicinity, how do they protect themselves from, either electromagnetic radiation or electrogravitic effects and things like that.
Gravitic, that comes into play with some recent events that took place with this German Wings aircraft that crashed.
Right.
But I won't go off into that tangent, but keep in mind, for your audience to keep in mind the word gravitic, because we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Here's the issue, or the answer to that. Number one, the machine is located, as you know, 300 feet below ground. Also, the ring, the accelerator itself, of which there are 4 of them in succession, they're all linked together, but we'll focus on the main ring where the large collisions take place. All of that is located within a subterranean tunnel system, a circular tunnel system. There are actually 2 tunnels, one for equipment and maintenance that is outside, and an inner ring, which is where the accelerated particles are traveling. These are all shielded. Each of these tubes within these subterranean tunnels are all shielded. And they are also cooled for the purpose of cooling the magnets down because they're superconducting magnets. But the shielding is a combination of the Earth itself, the confinement of the beam of particles that is rotating through the ring, the confinement by the superconducting magnets, also is able to maintain the energies that are derived from the collisions from escaping beyond the detectors. There are 4 principal detectors within which the collisions take place of these beams. And if we had a graphic, it would be easier to represent this. But when the collision occurs, the energies that are generated by these collisions are actually captured within the detectors themselves. The detectors are massive, massive machines, multiple stories in height and length. And so they have shielding, and they also have the magnets to capture and control and confine the energies that are derived from the collisions themselves. So everything is pretty much shielded and protected. The workers, certainly, there's no one within these subterranean tunnels where the rings themselves are located, partly because it's so cold, colder than outer space in those tunnels, but also because of the danger of radiation. And should there be a catastrophic failure within the tube itself in the tunnel, it would be instantaneous death to anyone in that area.
Right. And if it does open a black hole or something, then it'll be, I guess those workers up top will get sucked down or something. But that makes sense. But I guess a follow-up question to that would be, if the shielding is, so good and it's all protected, how could there be geological effects or in the ionosphere effects there? How does it escape, or how does it affect the outside world around CERN?
Well, that's a great question, and it somewhat goes counter to what I just explained in the sense of it is well protected and well shielded, because I will backtrack and say that when the superconducting magnets that confine these particle streams into the ring are operating, they do generate significant amounts of magnetic energy due to the high current that is going on in the machine. Anytime you have large amounts of electricity and particles moving through them, you're generating large magnetic fields around the machine itself. So in the sense of protection from the radiation that is generated by these particles being collided, there's plenty of shielding in terms of the radiation. But the magnetic forces that are generated by the superconducting magnets cannot be isolated. And therefore, we see the effects locally, gravimetrically within the planet itself, causing earthquakes, but also with the magnetosphere and the magnetopause surrounding our planet and shielding it from radiation and gamma rays from the outside. It is definitely morphing and changing when it is powered up, changing the magnetosphere. And so there is no effective way to prevent the magnetic forces that are generated by this electric machine from reaching outside the machine and affecting the planet and outside the planet.
Yeah, that's interesting. I can see how that can be, I guess protect the nearby humans and whatnot from, the immediate dangers. But then, there are certain aspects of just nature itself, I suppose, the fabric of creation that are, you can't contain even once you generate that sort of power and energy. But one more question before we get, a little bit more deeper into the rabbit trail, if you will. I've heard you talk about strangelets. What are strangelets and why are they significant?
Yeah, strangelets are openly acknowledged as being produced by the Large Hadron Collider. They are termed or labeled as quark gluon condensates rather than strangelets. The people at CERN do much to avoid hanging the name strangelets on the quark gluon condensate that they're creating, because there are a lot of fears associated with that. And that's why I call the strangelets the cousins of the black holes, because everybody is fearful of black holes being created, much like Dr. Stephen Hawking has warned us that micro black holes could be created by the Large Hadron Collider. The people at CERN likewise do not want people to be afraid of their production of strangelets, because the name sounds so ominous, and therefore having the same associated fears that they have with the production of black holes. So to define a strangelet again, it is a non-naturally occurring particle. These are considered to be theoretical particles, but they have been acknowledged as being produced as recently as in a paper that was published in August out of the Brookhaven National Laboratory with the Relativistic Heavy Ion Collider, the RHIC, which is right down the street from the Twin Towers, so to speak, from New York's Twin Towers, the former Twin Towers. The paper that was published acknowledged the successful production of strangelets, which they named as strangelets, having been produced in April of last year. Um, the strangelets are produced likewise within the Alice detector, where the beams cross and the particles collide within the Large Hadron Collider. And these condensates are dangerous. And I'll stop there in case you want to interject, but I can go on with that.
Yeah, go ahead and continue with that track for a few more minutes. I'm curious to hear where that's headed. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, essentially strangelets, there are some characteristics to them that need to be explained. They have the ability, because they are stable particles, they have the ability to attract normal atoms to them. Normal atoms and molecules are considered to be unstable, and I'm being simplistic here, but they have the ability, the affinity to attract other matter to them and therefore grow exponentially in size. So they are very much like a black hole in the sense that they attract other things to them. They're not necessarily attracting light as a black hole does, but again, because they're the cousin of a black hole, in my estimation, they attract matter to themselves and then grow in size. The other issue with them is that they are so heavy and dense that they fall through the floor of the detector. Again, lack of ability to shield everything that goes on at CERN. These strangelets escape from the detector, the Alice detector, passing through the Earth itself until they come to rest in the center, in the core of the planet. And at that point, they begin to grow. The other characteristic of strangelets, they are the most powerful explosives known to man. And so they are inherently dangerous to handle. And I'll stop there.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's I'm picturing like a living goo type substance or something that's sinking deep into the Earth's crust, and that just sounds terrifying. But let's get into a little bit of the esoteric, even more esoteric, I suppose, elements of this, and then we'll get into the plane crash a little bit. But Luke Reynolds wanted to know more about the connection of CERN and Saturn, and he said that you've made the argument that they were trying to build a portal between the two, and asked if you can be more specific about this, and do you have any evidence other than the Saturn symbolism itself?
Yes, I would refer anyone that's interested in this issue to the Thunderbolts project online. This is primarily concerned with the theory of the electric universe as opposed to the gravity structure of the universe, the gravitational structure. Again, I'll summarize this, but the electric universe postulates that there was no Big Bang. Also, that everything that we see in the universe is due to electrical energy, and that the planets themselves have a connection between them that is electric in the form of an electric plasma. We've all heard of dark matter and dark energy. That is part of the gravitational model, the Einstein standard model for the universe, which is based on gravity. Unfortunately, that theory and that model ignores the fact that most everything in the universe is comprised of electrical energy. And specifically, we're talking about electric plasma and plasma discharges that take place between heavenly bodies. This happens all the time between the Earth and the Sun, for example. But Hubble telescope, for example, has provided fantastic photographs of nebula that are essentially long, twisted ribbons that look very much akin to the human DNA in the sense that they're a twisted helix, a double-strand helix.
Wow.
And that is something that is typical of an electrical discharge. You can reproduce in the laboratory plasma, electric plasma, that will perform and behave exactly the same way in the laboratory as it does on the macro scale in the cosmos. Absolutely identical in their shape, their morphology, and the way that they behave. And therefore, what you're looking at essentially when I refer to the Hubble telescope image of a ribbon or a helix in the cosmos is a Birkeland current. A Birkeland current is two strands of charged particles in the form of a plasma that twists. And if you've ever seen those little plasma balls you can buy in the science stores, you can put your hand on the glass ball and the plasma will attract to your hand.
Yeah.
Those are Birkeland currents, and that happens throughout the universe. And in specific answer to Saturn used to, in ancient times, prior to the Greek gods, the Roman gods, all of the, Shiva, prior to all of those gods being created, we had what was known as the Golden Age. That's the theory, somewhat like the Garden of Eden. And back in the Golden Age, Saturn, Venus, and Mars were in alignment and in very close proximity to the planet Earth, and were in a vastly different position than they are now. And they were in a straight line. Picture Mars being first and closest to the Earth, and then Venus, and then Saturn behind. And Saturn, in fact, being so close, it blotted out the sun, and you'd only see the corona around the edges of Saturn. That's how close it was. There was a plasma connection, electric plasma connection, that was established through this alignment of those three planets and Earth. And you may have heard from Scripture Jacob's ladder and the coming and goings of angels on Jacob's ladder. Well, this is what Jacob's ladder is. It's a plasma conduit. I'm going to cut to the chase because we're limited on time, but what CERN is trying to do amongst their multitudes of uses and applications for this machine, their ultimate goal, we all have talked about the portal, but we need to go beyond the dimensional portal aspect of this. And why do you open a doorway? Well, they want to recreate Jacob's ladder. They want to recreate, using this machine, a plasma conduit, a Birkeland current, a twisted helix or Birkeland currents between the machine and the southern pole of Saturn to establish that ladder again.
Wow.
And I'm going to stop there because I know you'll have questions.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I can probably stick on that topic forever, but I guess similar to that, there was someone named Osiris, I think is the name. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that quite properly, but he said that in 2012, after firing up CERN, they were able to open portals, and the rumor is that they saw giants or Nephilim within it, and that there was an adiabatic quantum interdimensional computer that will solve equations and formulas in another dimension and give the solution back to ours with quantum processing and entanglement. Are these just rumors, or is there any truth to any of that? Yeah.
I can tell that the person posting the question has been listening to me because I'm one of the very few people, I'm not puffing myself up here, but it just happens that I'm one of the few people who's even talking about the adiabatic quantum computer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in my book, 2048, Diamonds in the Rough. But the adiabatic quantum computer is a quantum computer that does not use transistors. It uses qubits, and it processes a combinatorial program in another dimension. This is at the quantum level. It places a problem into another dimension and extracts the solution back into our dimension.
Mm.
This is a device that is being used in conjunction with establishing and controlling the portal that will be opened in September. They need this computer in order to establish the stability and the long-term maintenance of this opening, as well as the plasma conduit. Now, going back to the issue of 2012 and the accidental or brief opening of a portal, there's only been one published account of this that I have been able to find, and it appears to me that it may have been satire. I've not found anything that verifies or that we can actually be able to go to definitive
confirm it.
And so I sidestep it a little bit. I say that, well, the lack of information may be an indication of a cover-up, but the other is it was published on April 1st, which is our April Fool's Day.
Right.
So I want to sidestep it a little bit only because I haven't been able to vet the sources, but The other issue is it's very probable that they did accidentally, and that was part of the reason that the magnets were suddenly quenched, which is a catastrophic shutdown of the magnets, which essentially destroys them, and that's why they've spent 2 years replacing them. But the other reason for the shutdown of the machine was they needed to achieve higher power levels, and they could not do that with the existing magnets that they had. So there may be a little tongue-in-cheek there, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's that kind of stuff. It's difficult to vet some of those things. I mean, they're not going to publish, oh, we saw Nephilim, through a portal. But if there is any truth to it, then a satire piece would be a good place to sort of throw it out there to see what the public reaction might be to some, information like that. But getting back to Jacob's Ladder, actually, Stephanie Pisani had a question, and she was talking about how back in 2012, NASA reported that there were hidden portals in Earth's magnetic fields, and this was published, and there's articles out there. And so her question, and I guess it ties into what you just talked about with Jacob's Ladder, but with these known portals or wormholes that exist already in Earth's magnetosphere, what sort of effect does the CERN project have on already existing portals?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I'm aware of the satellites that have been in geosynchronous orbit monitoring the multiple sites where we have very small portals that appear to be opening because of the disturbances in the magnetosphere around the planet. And those disturbances are naturally occurring because of gamma rays that come in from other celestial bodies, as well as the effects of the sun itself with the solar wind and those accelerated particles. These are momentary portals, and they're considered to be portals simply because it appears that they're distorting time and space in a specific location and a specific locale, and that's due to the effect of accelerated particles that are coming towards the planet. And this goes back to the electric theory, the Thunderbolts project. They've done a great explanation of all of this in the sense that when you have particles that are thrown off from the sun in a coronal mass ejection, they actually accelerate and gain speed the further they get away from the sun, which is counterintuitive, but they do that because they're being propelled by electricity. Now, the reason I bring that up is because you're seeing small conjunctions of energy, electric energy, that are meeting at specific points in the magnetosphere and causing these distortions that are then called portals. But they really aren't dimensional portals, so to speak. You're not looking at the ability to go to one of these and move into another dimension because they wink out of existence in milliseconds. But they are akin to what this machine is trying to create. And again, that is a stable portal in the Higgs field, and then the projection or production of a plasma conduit through that portal.
That's really fascinating. Some of this, I appreciate your ability to sort of dumb it down for the rest of us, because some of this is pretty intense, but I've been able to track with you for most of this. So, but let's get into the plane crash a little bit as well, because, that's kind of been the big story this week is the A320 going down in the French Alps. What do you think happened there? And do you think there's any connection to CERN at all?
There's a confluence of incidents that have occurred. On the 21st of March, which predates the plane crash, we had the grounding out and shorting out of one of the sectors of magnets within the Large Hadron Collider. Now, again, I have to couch what I say because I'm only taking it from CERN, and I don't always believe everything they tell me. But on the 21st, they had the magnets shut down. And then we have on the 24th, the aircraft going down. Now, that's quite a span of time to have a correlation between those two events.
Right.
I will give you two things. We mentioned gravimetric effects, which essentially is a gravity wave that moves through the crust of the planet. It has been, conjectured only that there was a gravimetric wave that was detected at the same time the aircraft went down. The gravimetric wave that passed through the Alps themselves. And if that's the case, there's a possibility that it could have disturbed the avionics, the controls, and the instruments on the aircraft. However, if you're to follow that line of thinking of a large gravimetric wave moving through the mountains, then why did it not affect other aircraft?
Right.
So I moved to my theory, and again, it's purely conjecture on my part, that because a single aircraft was involved, that this was a directed energy weapon that was used against it. And the reason that I say directed energy, I'm not speaking of there was another story that came out hours after I broadcast this on Ground Zero with Clyde Lewis on a national program. Hours later, there was a release of a report from a disinformation site saying that a laser was used to take down the aircraft. This was not a laser. This was a disintegration of the aircraft and the bodies. And the impact on the ridgeline causing two separate spatter patterns, if you will, of debris, it doesn't account for the level of destruction of the bodies as well as the aircraft itself. So that leads me to a directed energy source as to the pulverizing of the bodies and the parts of the aircraft themselves. So consequently, you have to say, if it's a directed energy weapon, where did that come from? Well, I'm not going to say that it necessarily came from anywhere specifically, because that's going to get me in trouble. I'll let the audience, make their own leap as to the source of that directed energy weapon. There was a witness account from the village right next to the point of impact, in which he said that he heard two distinct explosions. Each explosion prior to the impact of the aircraft lasted as long as 8 seconds apart apiece. Now, if that's the case, then we have a buildup of energy occurring and a long explosion taking place because of the disintegration effect of the aircraft. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, it seems similar to some of the 9/11 reports as well, that there were some different explosions, not just the one with the planes hitting. But I think you're onto something with the directed energy weapon, because there was someone named Lil Kira 227 who posted just her thoughts on the whole situation with the crash, and she was suggesting that cremating at the optimum temperature for a human body is 1400 to 1800 degrees, and it takes about 2 to 2.5 hours to cremate completely. So her suspicion was raised when, how is it possible that in a plane crash, all these bodies were just completely incinerated, or, a large portion of it anyway, when it takes 2 to 2.5 hours at, roughly 14 to 1800 degrees for that to happen. So a directed energy weapon would make a lot of sense if that's really what happened.
Yeah, I would agree with her. Virtually, any aircraft that goes down is going to throw bodies in multiple directions, in the direction of travel and outward. So, yeah, the fact that we're not seeing, and it's just very suspicious. And, of course, the whole thing with the pilot and the door and being locked out and, the suicidal tendencies or whatever, the co-pilot, all of that's a complete fabrication, and I think everybody in our audience, our type of audience, would agree that that's just a cover story.
Yeah, it seems a little too convenient that all these planes that crash are suicide missions of one man that wants to take everybody out. But there was one of the viewers of the channel, James Thompson, did a little extra research, and he came across some interesting information regarding Yvonne Selke, who was one of the people that perished on the flight. He was able to make some dot connections that's pretty interesting, and let me share that with you and get your thoughts on it. But basically, Yvonne Selke, in the video that I produced yesterday and showed, worked for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which was funded by Booz Allen Hamilton. And what James Thompson was able to point out was that there's a gentleman named Michael Vickers. And last week on the 19th, the Washington Post published an article that stated that Vickers, this Michael Vickers, who oversees all these different security agencies, stepped down. And this is a direct quote from the Washington Post. It says, Vickers oversees all intelligence and security agencies for the Defense Department as the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. Those organizations include the National Security Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. He held the position since 2011. So here we have one of the people that oversees the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency step down 1 week before this plane goes down in the French Alps that happens to carry someone who worked for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's quite remarkable. Again, the confluence of things coming together. To me, it screams whistleblower. Not necessarily Michael Vickers himself, although Yvonne Selke may have been carrying information to someone in Dusseldorf or someone in Germany or thereabouts that was going to be damaging perhaps to Mr. Vickers. I don't want to say anything negative about Mr. Vickers. I don't know the gentleman. I'm just connecting dots here, but Yvonne Selke, having worked for National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, they're essentially a mapping and observation and intelligence gathering agency using satellites, airborne photography, remote sensing. They're taking in information that, if you will, to summarize it, that is visible information and going through the analysis of that information. And they do that worldwide through Booz Allen Hamilton. Who's a defense contractor. She worked for them for 23 years in association with NGA. Let's go back to gravimetric wave. Gravimetric wave passing through the Alps, as it does in other areas like the Andes Mountains and the Himalayas. These waves going through would be something that the NGA would have been paying attention to and would have sensed with their airborne satellites, their spaceborne satellites. She may have had information related to the source of these gravimetric waves. And I maintain that they are artificially produced gravimetric waves. And I will even go so far as to put out the conjecture, the theory, not an accusation, but the conjecture that possibly CERN and their magnets are causing gravimetric waves to propagate through the planet. We've seen earthquakes occur at the same time as the powering up of the magnets in the past, and I expect to see more. She may have damaging information regarding CERN that she was going to pass along, and that may be the reason that that plane was targeted.
Yeah.
Pure speculation, nothing negative I'm saying about Michael Vickers or Yvonne Selke. I want to emphasize that.
Yeah.
Nor the people working at CERN. This is not about the people that are involved in these projects. There's a much bigger nefarious agenda going on behind the scenes.
Sure, which leads me to, I have a couple more questions here, but that leads right into the question I had, which was, where do you see the potentials of CERN in biblical prophecy? And, I know you mentioned Jacob's Ladder, but do you see any connection in Scripture anywhere that you might find CERN as something that was mentioned? Or it's not CERN precisely, but, something like it.
Sure. We talk about a portal, and another way to relate that in Scripture is opening the bottomless pit, and CERN functioning as the key to unlock and open the bottomless pit. And the bottomless pit essentially is an interdimensional opening to an area where there are demonic spirits. And in my estimation, I know this sounds totally far-fetched and bizarre, but if we go back to the previous comments that I made about the Golden Age, the alignment of Saturn, the close proximity of Saturn with the planet and its plasma connection, I believe that Saturn is the bottomless pit. It is the receptacle and holding area for the demonic spirits in the Bible, and that it essentially is the bottomless pit itself, and it's going to be open. It doesn't have to reside in the core of the earth necessarily. Saturn has always been worshipped by the occult groups, and Saturn worship is purely demonic in my estimation. And I have no reason to doubt that that is where the spirit entities presently reside, and their goal is to bring those entities back to Earth by opening the bottomless pit.
Wow. That's incredible. So last question here, moving forward, what is the schedule for CERN? What should we be looking out for?
Well, I think their schedule, again, is subject to, questioning, because now we have they're published. If you want to look at their previously published schedule, go to my website at anthonypatch.com and go to Images 2 tab. Click on the Images 2, and you'll see a picture of one of the detectors. Click on the detector. It opens up the actual schedule, version 1.3 of their schedule. It was just published a few weeks ago. On that schedule, the commissioning of the main ring, the commissioning of the ring meaning that it's ready to accept full power, so it's ready to accept streams of particles. On the 25th,
wow,
25th of March, that's when they were supposed to be commissioning the beam. That's scheduled now because of this short circuit in one of the 8 sectors that has occurred with the magnets, the grounding of one of their magnet sections. It throws their schedule off. But long and short of it is September, October, and November, if you look at their schedule, is when they're going to be colliding particles of lead ions. In the schedule, it's listed as ion experiments. Because they're using particles of lead, which are very heavy and dense compared to protons and other particles that they have collided in the past, they're going to be able to generate the highest levels of energy that they've ever been able to create, which is 14 tera-electron volts. And that begins in September. There are intermediate dates and experiments that will take place, and it's on that schedule at my website. However, that schedule that is published on my website now possibly has been distorted because of this failure in one of the magnets.
Sure. Yeah, that's incredible. So, I mean, that kind of stuff is, I guess we'll just have to keep track of what's happening, keep a close eye on what's happening, and, use, I guess, the published schedule as sort of a roadmap, but, shift things around as things occur. But let's wrap it up here. Where can people find your work?
Well, if they go to anthonypatch.com, they can see on my homepage where I've put out some of the dates that tentatively had been scheduled, as I mentioned, and the power levels. And it also indicates the power level threshold of 10 TeV, which is a production of strangelets. But not to get too far off into that, my website does not have a lot of information on it for the specific reason that I would encourage people to read my books. And you can see the list of subjects at my website that I cover in my books. It's quite a bit. There's transhumanism, there's quantum computers, there's CERN, of course, particle accelerator. There's quite a bit that's going on in my books. And my books are designed for the person who's never heard of CERN, who's never heard of so-called chemtrails. The subjects are arranged in a buffet style so that you can get a taste of subjects you've never heard of before, and then if you choose to pursue those and learn more about those subjects, it'll pique your interest and at least bring them to your attention. And that's done in a novel fashion so that it's not boring, non-fiction work. But the website has a few resources. It has links to a lot of videos that I have done as Google Hangouts with End Times Matrix News with Tim and Chris. And there's an awful lot of information that we cover in those Google Hangouts. And also I have some of my own YouTube videos on there. So a great amount of information is provided in the form of conversations rather than written out on the website. I hope that helped.
So there you go. That was my conversation with Anthony Patch. We actually got into a short conversation afterwards about transhumanism and the connection with CERN and what's going on there. And there's some more fascinating stuff that he's looked at, and it's quite remarkable. So I recommend you check out his website and check out his books, and I think you guys can get a lot out of it. And I appreciate everybody who asked questions again. Thank you so much. I think this conversation was that much better because of your questions. And let me know if you want me to do more of this kind of interview style where I'm able to ask some of your questions to guests and things that I am able to contact and get a hold of and have conversations with. So let me know on that front. In terms of what I thought about the conversation, the most interesting thing that I thought he said was his theory that Saturn was the bottomless pit and they're trying to create some sort of wormhole from Saturn to the Earth. And that would be really interesting. And again, off air, he mentioned some things about the reason why they're creating hybrids on Earth is for these spirits to harness bodies when they get here. So again, very interesting stuff. And then he also mentioned some things with me about the third strand of DNA that has something to do with CERN. So I think all of this stuff is in his book, so I recommend you check that stuff out. And I think I'm going to have to look into some of the items that he brought up and try to do my own little research to vet some of it or look into some of it. And I'm sure I'll come out with more videos in that regard, because it seems like CERN, after talking to Anthony here, my sense is that while we sort of think that it's just the latest trend of conspiracy theories, what they're trying to do in the next few months can really, really be detrimental to the Earth. And some really, really bizarre things can go down. So keep that in mind. And I want to just wrap it up with a scripture reading here. 1 Peter 4, verses 7 through 11. And it says this in the ESV: "The end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Whoever speaks, as one who speaks oracles of God. Whoever serves, as one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him belong glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen." Thanks for watching this video, guys. Please subscribe to the channel, share this video, comment, be nice in the comment section, and hope you guys have a great day. God bless.